Hello again. We are Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, continuing our preview series of SEC schedules. Today, Blake, we get to the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Of course, a horrible offseason, the tragic loss of Coach Mike Leach. Zach Arnett takes over as he did for the bowl game a year ago. It's a new era, a new offense, a lot of losses on defense, but State's got 8 home games, including 3 to start and 5 of the first 6. And it is going to be a very interesting transition year in Starkville.
Yeah, I mean, only one road game until October the 21st. That's a nice, I think, just kind of schedule, as you said, given the circumstances. And I mean, they are transitioning to a new coach, and they've certainly had the off season to do some different things and try to continue to build off the momentum of the program and everything that sort of Mike Leach had built there. And now, I do think just because of the way the schedule sets up early on, that is the way you would want it, rather than having it on the opposite way, where maybe you play the bulk of your games later in the season, which they still get. Like you said earlier, they got 8 home games, so they play 3 of their final 4 in Starkville. So, I mean, I think overall you just look at it from that standpoint, and it does feel like the kind of schedule that, even though I don't think this is going to be a team that's going to be picked, near the top of the West or anything, I do think it's at least a schedule that can offer them some opportunity to at least, have what I think is going to be inevitable adjustments to certain things, just given, a new coaching, a new guy at the top, just based on, they're wanting to change some things and try some different things and all that. I think it's a schedule that'll allow them to do it. So.
Blake, I've segmented State's schedule into 5 portions. The first 2 games I'll call the break-in portion of the schedule. Southeastern Louisiana to open the season, Arizona following that. Those 2, of course, both in Starkville. Sela last year went 9-4. It played 2 games, I believe, against FBS teams, losing those 24-7 to Louisiana and 42-9 to Florida Atlantic. But outlook pretty good for Sela, ranked 11th in the FCS by Athlon and 19th, I think, by the coaches in preseason. And then you got Arizona in a rematch of last year's 39-17 state win in the desert. Arizona returns most of its offense, but it'll struggle on defense. The break-in portion, not necessarily the easiest break-in portion we'll see in the SEC. It's not a give-me FCS game, and of course you're playing a Power 5 team in week 2 at a time where a lot of teams from the league still probably will not have played a Power 5 team by that point.
Yeah, but I mean, I still think it's just looking at it, and Mississippi State should be a better team than both of those teams. And I think it's, as we just talked about, those being home games, yeah, those are games you have to win. And I think the Arizona one, like you mentioned, is doing, some research on them. They will have some good players back offensively, but the defense is something that, you add in what we don't really know. I mean, we certainly still, are intrigued to see what Mississippi State does offensively. Certainly they have Will Rogers back and stuff, but, how they approach that's going to be very, one of the bigger storylines, I would say, heading into the season, once we actually see them out there. So I still, just think that those are 2 games that they should win. And, like you said, even if it's maybe not the easiest, I don't think it's necessarily, something that stands out to me as though these are ones that are going to kind of catch you. I think even for a team that, again, has to replace some guys, I do think Mississippi State has a pretty nice schedule, at least for these first couple games, the way it sets up.
Yeah, not to mislead anybody, State will be favored in those. My point would be that just there's some teams with some earlier starts, and there's certainly some teams with earlier next portions of the schedule. If we call the first part the break-in portion, I think we call this the don't let this break you portion of the schedule. 3 games in a row, LSU in Starkville, South Carolina in Columbia, and Alabama at home. LSU last year was a 31-16 LSU win in Starkville. Last year, Carolina did not play South Carolina. State did not play South Carolina. These 2 teams don't play a lot. They played twice in 10 years. Those came in 2013 and 2016. State won in 2016, snapping a 9-game losing skid in that series. I'd probably rather play Carolina early than late, but I'd probably rather not play them at all. And then you've got Alabama, and that one's been a disaster lately for Mississippi State, as it has been for most programs. There's been the last 5 losses are by 24, 42, 41, 31, 24, and then 7 if you want to go back 6. They beat Alabama in 06 and 07, but not since. I think this is a portion of the schedule, Blake, that anybody would have trouble with.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. But I think just the overall, I'm trying to be the optimist here. I think for Mississippi State fans, I think you can certainly say that the 4 toughest games on the schedule are all in Starkville. And I mean, I don't know how many teams we can say that about in the SEC this season. So I think that's at least something you can lean on with LSU, Alabama, Kentucky, Ole Miss, all coming to the Davis Wade Stadium. And I think, at least right now, the way things enter the season, those are the 4 toughest games on the schedule. So I think there's at least something to that. Yes. Are they going to be the underdog against LSU and Alabama? Probably. Are they going to be the underdog on the road against South Carolina? Probably. So those are tough games. And you said maybe the slate that you hope doesn't sort of break you in terms of maybe building up, some good things in those first couple games. And then you have to run into this gauntlet here that, I mean, if you go 1-2 in these 3, I think you'll be happy. Because I just think, the way it sets up, and that's where, again, going 1-2 would be big for trying to get to a bowl, given that, you've still got 3 SEC West road trips to go. And then you've still got a couple tough home games, like we said, against a Kentucky and an Ole Miss, probably ranked teams right there too. So,
okay, the next we get to the rebound portion of the schedule. That's one game against Western Michigan. You'll see the bottom of the ticker. We've taken some averages of some sources in terms of where they are ranked 1 to 133. Western Michigan would be the next game in the sequence. I think they are 123 nationally. They are picked at the bottom of the MAC or near the bottom of the MAC. Not very good offensively. Teams have never played before. Then we get to what I call the swing game portion of the schedule, Blake. You got at Arkansas, at Auburn, Kentucky, at A&M. This is the road stretch of the schedule. Arkansas last year, State won that game 40-17, lost by 3 and 7 in the previous 2 years. Auburn last year and the year before, State won those games. Last year's game, I think, was pretty interesting, if I remember. Or maybe it was the Ole Miss State Auburn game. I think both of them were interesting, actually. Kentucky last year, State lost that one 27-17, but State won it in Starkville last time those teams played in 21 in Starkville. And then Texas A&M, where State has won the last 2. I think this is where State's season is made or broken, Blake.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's the swing portion of whatever the record is in those 4 games. Probably decides whether they're a bowl team or maybe they're, the spoiler in the SEC West. And I think that's one of the problems when you look at the schedule is I think it's really hard to know what you're going to get exactly from Mississippi State. And I think that makes it hard to look at any of these games and, have a strong opinion one way or the other outside of, like we said, maybe an Alabama, LSU, teams like that I would expect, to be probably, much better in terms of their hopes at a national championship. I don't know if we're going to put Mississippi State in that category right now, but it's just so hard to know. And I think that's where not knowing exactly maybe what things are going to look like for Mississippi State this season, even though, certainly know some of the players that are coming back, some of the players they've added, but I do still think there are some unknowns there on kind of where you place them in that SEC West pecking order. I've seen a variety of sort of people put them in different spots. So, yeah, I mean, these games, 3 of those road games at Arkansas, Auburn, Texas A&M, what's Auburn look like? As we've said in other schedules at this point, what do they look like on October the 28th? Where is Arkansas season at on October the 21st? Has A&M, overachieved, underachieved by the time we get to November 11th? So I think it's the same conversation probably with those 3 teams that we're having with Mississippi State to a certain extent. You feel like there's a lot of ways the season could go. Meanwhile, as I've said before in some of the other scheduled things, I'm pretty high on Kentucky. Even with that game in Starkville, I think that's probably a tough game to win, just given what our expectations are for Kentucky. But it's still a winnable game. And so, yeah, those 4 games right there, that's big in terms of what Mississippi State could be this season.
Yeah, there's also a bye week in there. In fact, it's right between Western Michigan and the start of that stretch, which again starts with Arkansas. The 5th portion of the schedule, I'll call the rivalry portion. Southern Miss is on the schedule this year. Mississippi State has won the last 5 between those teams. They don't play every year. The last win for Southern Miss, I think, came in 1988, and the last time they played was 2019 when Mississippi State won the game 38-15. And then, of course, the Egg Bowl with Ole Miss, which State won last year in Mike Leach's last game. Now, that has been a series where teams are having trouble finding momentum recently. Since 2011, no team, if my notes are correct, has won more than 2 in a row there. And then State won 3 in a row from 2009 to 2011. That's the last thing approaching dominance in this series. Egg Bowl is always interesting for a lot of reasons, and I think Southern Miss, that is a team that will certainly get up for State. Southern Miss doesn't get a lot of chances to play SEC teams, at least doesn't get that every year. I know that'll be maybe the game that the Golden Eagles will circle on their schedule, Blake.
I don't know, Chris. I'm starting to think you got Mississippi State not winning a game this season. But no, I'm just
That's
kidding.
not the case.
I'm just kidding with you. No, this is what we do. We're previewing the schedule, and so we're trying to give you everything on some of these teams. But no, yeah, I mean these two. The Egg Bowl is the Egg Bowl. I think it's as we always say, we're doing these in June. That game's going to be played on November the 23rd. Who knows where those two teams are going to be at that point in the season? So it's really hard to project ahead. You kind of know it's going to be a wild game, usually is. So that's another one you circle. And as we said earlier, it's in Starkville. So that's the theme of this entire schedule for me. It's just there's so many home games. There's so many potential opportunities out there. As I said, for the 4 ranked teams, probably as of right now, are all in Starkville. They're all coming to you, and that is such a big part of a schedule in the SEC. And I do think there is something to that. It's can you pull off any of those wins against those kind of teams? That's what makes you into an SEC West type contender, makes you into a potential top 25 team. But then you're trying to navigate the landmines of the South Carolina, Arkansas, Auburn, A&M road trips, and yeah, there's just not a lot of. We say this about all the SEC West teams specifically, right? It's just that there's really no game you circle and feel 100% sure about. And I don't know if that's the case in the East anymore either, in all honesty. But so, yeah, I think that's just where things stand for the schedule. But the good news for Mississippi State is they have so many home games and they get their toughest opponents at home. And I just think that is something that not a lot of other SEC teams can say just based on what we know now. Not to say that, a South Carolina and Arkansas, certainly A&M, I think is going to be a tough test, even if they're not ranked right off the bat. Not to say those teams won't wind up being perhaps some of the most challenging on the schedule. So
I think week to week, one of the more interesting ones in the SEC if you just like storylines and competitive games, and can't wait to see how that plays out. For Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for watching us here at Southeastern.